Hi, this is John and Hannah with Red Dice Diaries, and I'm hijacking this podcast to talk to John about hit points in the Fates.
Okay, right, so obviously for people who aren't aware, I used to run an awful lot of Fate games. I don't run quite so many of them now because I tend to run more sort of like the OSR, like old school D&D stuff, but I still love the Fate for one-shots. I run it at conventions and stuff like that, and both Fate Core and Fate Accelerated. I'll probably also slip in a mention of the new Fate Condensed, but it's your show, love. What is it you want to know about Fate?
I, for the last 2 years, have been running this crazy hybrid of Modiphius Star Trek and Fate. And
so that's Modiphius Star Trek, which is like uses the 2D20 system normally, doesn't it?
But nearly all of it's been thrown out. There's just a few very simple parts of it that we've kept.
Okay.
Occasionally we'll use like one of the Modiphius powers as a Fate aspect or a stunt, but obviously then it'll be completely changed on the numbers.
So you're sort of taking some of like the themes and the ideas from it, but you're adapting it.
Specifically what we've taken from there is the names of some of the skills, because that was really neatly done.
Okay.
And the rather than everybody having their own fate points, there's a fate pool that everybody can add to.
So it's like a communal sort of group thing.
Yeah. Much like I think it's the momentum pool in the Modiphius.
Yes,
game.
it is, yeah.
I'm a very narrative GM. I don't like number crunching. There's sort of, from day one, been this like acceptance that these are main characters in a Star Trek show, so they're not going to die.
Yeah, okay.
There's been a definite lean away from combat, obviously because of the vibe of the show.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to say, I mean, because I tend to run a lot of the old school like D&D games where, you know, like you're a first level guy and like a goblin arrow can like, and that's you dead. I'm sort of used to games that are like fairly sort of high turnover or sort of fairly high death rates, but I can certainly see why, you know, if you're running a Star Trek game, like unless you've got that red shirt of doom on, like you say, you're probably not going to cark it.
Yeah, well, with it being Federation Day tomorrow, it's a good day to do this episode for you.
Although it might not be by the time you're listening to this. But we're recording this on the 4th of April, so apparently I've been informed by Hannah this morning it's Federation Day tomorrow, and that is, for those of us who aren't like massively tracked up.
The anniversary or pre-anniversary, whatever you want to call it. It's the date that Zephram Cochrane makes the first warp flight and makes first contact with the Vulcans, which is 43 years from tomorrow.
And after that begins what I've come to know as the angsty that guy from Quantum Leap period of Star Trek history.
Yeah. So, also, we're just entirely disregarding the new Trek. It didn't happen.
That's because
it's someone else's fan fiction. This is my fan fiction.
That's because like, so, in the words of like the immortal Lord Gant, it's trash.
So, what's been happening thus far? We have like different levels of characters, because small player group, big cast of characters.
Okay.
Everybody has their own A character. That character isn't going to get killed. Just that simple. Because it's
so
Star
that's
Trek.
like your Kirk, your McCoy, your Spock.
That's your main characters in the show. There's also B characters. These are like recurring NPCs, or an NPC who's important to one story. They can die, but generally they're either alive or hurt or dead, as far as I do this. Again, because I tend to run quite a narrative story.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I like to keep
it makes
things
sense
fast
for Star Trek as well, yeah.
And then we have red shirts who are either alive or dead. There's a running joke that if a character doesn't have a name, then they're a red shirt. Thus, one of my players insists on every time a crewman is mentioned, giving them a name.
To try and stop them
getting killed.
That's fair. But I like that, because
it's got a definite charm to it.
Yeah, I like that, because obviously like it's cheesy, but it works with the subject you're going for.
Yeah.
Because like, let's face it, when you're watching the old Trek, it's like when someone comes in and they're like, "Oh, you're Ensign," and they have like they have no name, or they have like they're just called Ensign, or they have like a really generic name, like, "Oh, Ensign Smith." You're like, well, they're dead. But then when they come up and they're like, "Oh, Professor Worthington Smythe," And you're like, all right, well, they're obviously safe because they've got like a name and a bit of a backstory. So that sort of makes sense.
Yeah.
But anyway, you said you wanted to know something about Fate. So what is it?
As the game's expanded, they've moved from a ship to a space station.
Right.
And
okay.
I've now got a lot more sort of grey area characters, people who aren't necessarily bad guys. But
so like morally grey.
Yeah, they're not necessarily working in favour of things that the rest of the player group are working towards.
Okay.
So hit points, I think, are going to become a lot more important.
Because there's likely to be more combat and stuff.
As I'm expanding the player group, because I've now got, I think, 8 players who turn up now and then.
Okay.
I won't get more than 4 for one story, but loads of different people. I think it's more important to have this sort of more solid system for it.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, at the moment, if somebody gets hit by a weapon or a console explodes in their face or whatever, they're either hurt a little bit, hurt a lot, knocked out, or dead.
Okay.
And obviously, some of those stages I just skip with NPCs and red shirts.
Yeah, so like say if you're a red shirt, you're either alive or dead.
Yeah. Because there's no point in not doing.
Yeah, that's fair.
Unless,
unless it's for the story purposes. Yeah.
Unless,
like, I've been shot in the leg.
If the medical officer's there, I will allow the medical officer to attempt to save the red shirt.
That's cool. Yeah, give them a bit of like that's their flavour, isn't it?
Yeah, if there's nobody there who does that function and it's not important to the story, the red shirt's gone. But yeah, they don't let me kill the red shirts very often.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's what they're there for.
That's what I thought as well, but they don't like it, so...
Well, players do love their NPCs.
You play to your player group, don't you?
Yeah.
So, I wanted to ask you about how Fate normally does hit points.
Okay.
Because I've sort of vaguely wrapped my head around this whole stress and then consequences thing. I like the consequences because I do like to have, character progression.
Yeah, of course.
In spite of it being Star Trek, we're moving to Deep Space Nine now rather than Next Gen.
Okay, so we just talk a little bit about how Fate sort of by default does it.
Yeah.
So in Fate Core, you have a number of stress boxes. Mm-hmm. You have physical stress and you have mental stress. Mm-hmm. Now, these are represented by 1 to 4 boxes, depending on how tough your character is, the physical stress, or how much willpower you have for your mental stress. Now, each of those 4 boxes has a number next to it, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And when you get hit, you can tick one of those boxes to absorb that number of damage. But you can only tick 1 stress box for each hit. So, if I take, let's say I've got 4 physical stress boxes and I take 4 levels of damage, I can just tick the 4 box and go, that's absorbed, it's soaked.
Okay,
it does me no further harm. But you also have 3 consequence boxes, and these are labelled mild, moderate and severe. Now, a mild consequence can absorb a level 2 hit, a moderate consequence can absorb a level 4 hit, and a severe can absorb a level 6 hit. Now, stress represents just like, you've got dinged, you've got a bit scorched, it's a bit of damage, but you brush it off, you carry on, it's not long term. Consequences are long term sort of injuries. Now, because you can only tick 1 stress box for each combat, like each round, let's say I take 6 points of physical damage and I tick that level 4 box, I've still got 2 levels left. So I would then have to tick my level 2 consequence box. But when you tick a consequence box, you also gain an aspect representing that injury that you write next to it. So I might take let's say someone's shot me in the back of the leg, I might take shattered kneecap or something, and the GM gets a free invoke on that. So at some point in the future when I'm like, oh shit, we need to run away from these Cardassian agents who are coming after us, you can be like, oh well, you could run away, however you've got a shattered kneecap, so that role's going to be more difficult for you. And that's roughly how it works. Now, Fate Accelerated uses a pretty much the same method of doing it, but it simplifies it a lot. Well, not a lot, but a little bit. So for Fate Accelerated, which is a slightly more streamlined version, you just
This is closer to what we're using.
Yeah, so for this, you still have stress and consequences that work in the same way, but you just have one stress box that works for both physical and mental stuff.
Okay.
And you, again, you can only tick one stress box. You have 1 to 3 stress boxes in this, and you have the 3 consequence slots. And otherwise, it works absolutely the same. Now, when they did Dresden Files Accelerated, they made the stress boxes a little bit more like hit points. So in Dresden Files Accelerated, and also in Fate Condensed, which I'll talk about in a moment, they basically made each stress box is worth 1 point of damage. However, you can tick as many stress boxes as you want. So, and what they've done recently is they've brought out this Fate Condensed, which is a bit more like Fate Core. So it still uses skills and stuff like that, but obviously Fate Core came out, I think, about 8 years ago or something like that. So they've just sort of streamlined it a little bit, and they've taken aspects of what they've learned in other games. So in Fate Condensed, which is available freely as a PDF on drive-through, you get 3 physical stress and 3 mental stress. You still get your 3 consequences, but each stress box is worth 1 point of damage, but you can tick as many as you want. So if I took 3 damage, I could just go, right, I'm ticking all my stress boxes, don't have to worry about it, and I don't have to take a consequence straight away. Obviously, if I then take some more physical damage, and I've got no boxes left to be ticked, I have to take a consequence. And obviously you can have more than 3 dots depending on how tough you are, but so physically or mentally, but 3 is like what you start with. You can actually go up to 6. So you get more stress boxes, but they're worth less, but also you can tick more boxes off at one time, if you see what I mean.
Okay, so talk me through. You're a Klingon with a bat'leth. I'm a Starfleet officer with a phaser.
Okay.
Come at me.
Okay.
Saucy.
Okay. So what I would
That's
do.
yo mama in Klingon.
So what I would do is let's do this with like all 3 of those rules we've just been talking about. So I'm going to just have a quick look at a Fate core character sheet. So let's assume. Am I attacking you with a melee weapon?
Yeah.
I presume. Okay. So let's assume my fight score is great because I'm a Klingon warrior. It's my highest score, so I've got a +4 with that.
Okay.
So I roll my 4 fate dice.
You get +2. You've got
Okay,
6.
so that gives me as a result of 6. Assuming I'm not using any aspects or anything like that, that means I've got a combat score of 6. Now let's assume you roll your defense roll and you only get a 3. Now the difference between those 2 scores means that I have done you 3 points of damage. So let's say, so you've got your 2 physical stress boxes here. You could tick box number 2 and go, right, that's 2 levels of damage dealt with, but I've still got 1 point of damage left, so I'm going to have to take a consequence. Now, because there's no consequences worth 1 box, you'd have to take the 2 one, so you get a mild consequence.
Okay, so can I go 1 and 2 and use a 3 up
Yeah,
that
you
way?
certainly can.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can go. So
And then I've still got my 2 left for
exactly,
the next 5.
yeah, and that's the sort of thing you need to think about while you're doing it. So you've got rid of 1 using a stress box. You've got a mild consequence. So I then say, right, what's your negative aspect you've got from it, and you describe. So what injury might you have taken from this, like Klingon with his bat'leth attacking you, like a mild injury?
Flesh wound to the arm.
Okay, so flesh wound to the arm. So let's say in the next round of combat, you shoot at me with your phaser. Let's say you've got a +4 shoot score, because you're a well-trained Federation professional. Let's assume you roll a +2 like I did. You've got a result of 6. However, as the GM, I could go, all right, well, this Klingon, while he's trying to evade you, because let's say again, I've got a 3. So we've just reversed the results.
Yeah.
I could, however, say, because you've just recently obtained that consequence and I get a free use of it as the GM, I could go, yeah, well, unfortunately, you're a bit slow to bring up your phaser because of the injury to your arm. So the Klingon's going to get +2 to his roll because he's like trying to get into your blind spot or whatever. You know, you're struggling to get your arm and your phaser around. So my result now is a 5. So I've only taken 1 point of damage from you shooting at me, which I can just tick off one stress box, and I am grand. And that's how that would work in Fate Core. It would work the same way in Fate Accelerated, because, like I say, you still have the consequences and the stress, but you still have like the one track. Now, if we were going to do this in Fate Condensed or like Dresden Files Accelerated, in that scenario earlier on where we were saying you got 3 points of damage, hadn't you? Mm-hmm. What you could do is, instead of going, right, I'm going to have to take one stress and a level 2 consequence, you could go, I'm just going to tick off all 3 of my stress boxes, each worth 1. That's the damage nullified. So you've taken no consequences at all. So under those conditions, when it came to shooting your phaser at the Klingon, I wouldn't have a negative consequence to use against you. So you'd still be doing the 3 damage to me. So I think part of the reason they've done this is because it makes it a little bit more like hit points, so it's more familiar to people. It's less of a sort of leap. I mean, it's not a very complex system originally,
now,
but...
Here's the thing. Consequences.
Yes.
At the end of the game, anyone that's injured is going straight to medbay and getting fully healed up.
Okay, right. Well, the way this works, obviously you're free to do whatever you want with it in your game, but the way it works in like normal Fate is... stress is automatically recovered at the end of the encounter, because that's just like you dust yourself off, you get up, you carry on, or you're like, oh no, my spandex tunic's torn, but apart from that, you're fine. Now, consequences, you need like dice rolls to like heal them.
Right.
So with the mild consequences, you're like, oh, I've got like a rough arm, or whatever. I've been shot in the arm. You'd have to make a roll to heal that. Recovering from consequences in Fate Core, in order to regain the use of a consequence slot, you have to recover from it. That requires 2 things: succeeding at an action that allows you to justify recovery, and then waiting for an appropriate amount of time. So before you can even start healing, like your doctor or whatever has to make a medical roll based on, and the difficulty is the number of the consequence. So it's difficulty 2 for a mild one, difficulty 4 for a moderate, difficulty 6 for a severe. If that roll is made okay, you rename the consequence to represent the fact that it's healing. So you might change it from like shot up arm to like bandaged up arm, or arm in a sling. So you've still got the consequence, but you know it's healing. You then have to wait. If it's a mild consequence, you have to wait for a scene. If it's a moderate consequence, you have to wait a whole session after the recovery action's been made. For a severe consequence, you have to wait like a whole scenario, which normally is 2 to 3 sessions, but you know, it's an adventure. It's worth of time. So that's roughly how it works in most Fate. I mean, obviously you can adapt that. It depends on what you want to do for your game.
As I say, for the setting, consequences like that, physical consequences certainly, don't really seem to fit, because it's so rare that somebody's like injured enough to need recovery, and I don't know how to put it really. You could say it's a massive flaw in the game. I just quite like the idea of a world where, you know, medical stuff gets done efficiently and well. So what I'm really looking at is a nice simple way that I can represent this stuff that's going to play for like while a combat's going on, but not going to be
all right, well,
a major sort of slower downer of my game.
All right, well, let me float this idea past you. So if we look at the consequences box, we can see that split between the 3 of them, you've got 12 like levels of soak you can do. You've got 2, 4 and 6. What I would suggest is you take that 12, add like your 3 stress onto it. So say everyone's got 15 stress.
Yeah.
Each is worth 1 point of damage. So when you get hit, you can just tick off. You do it like hits, you tick them off.
Yeah.
And I would just say, if you want to keep it in the style you're talking about, just say if those 15 run out, you're effectively out of action for that scene. You're not dead, nothing like that. After the scene, you assume that they've been dealt with by the doctor, or they've had a hyperspray or whatever, and they can be in the next scene. You can still have the potential of death, because you can just say like, if you're out of action and you and like let's say you go out of action and like none of your mates are around, and there's a Klingon stood over you with a big bat left like, Rah! Then the GM's within their rights to say like, yeah, you're dead. But
that'd be a wank way for a main character to go out of
exactly.
series,
or if it's like dramatically appropriate. But yeah, I would say just give him like I mean, maybe not even 15, but just give them a number of stress points, each worth 1 damage that they can tick off like hit points, and say when they refresh at the start of each scene. If they run out in a scene, you're effectively out of action, you've been knocked out, you've been stunned by a phaser, whatever. So the penalty, so obviously you still want to be a bit careful, because the penalty is you're not going to be involved in the rest of the scene, because obviously you want there to be a penalty for it, but you'll be back into it next scene, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. So the other thing is scaling of damage.
Okay.
Because as we've sort of discussed over the course of this already, I want to be able to represent everything from a fist fight, a knife fight, and like high-powered energy weapons,
Yeah,
all on this same scale. And obviously you've got the difference between the two roles, the like attack roll and the defensive roll. That's the amount of hit points you'd normally take away.
that's correct.
Would you suggest that I have like addition to that, like additional damage for the type of weapon used?
What I'd suggest is that there's like an optional subsystem in Fate called like weapon ratings and armor ratings, which I don't use very often because I don't run a lot of sci-fi games. But I would suggest you use that, and it simply means that when you make an attack roll, if your weapon's got a weapon rate, that gets added to the damage, not to the attack roll.
Yeah.
So you make your attack roll as normal, and you go, oh, difference of 3, so I've done 3 levels of damage. I've got a weapon rating of 2, so it's actually 5 levels.
Because if I wanted to have like lots of Kung Fu fist fights, more hit points is better. For
yeah, so for
like
that you can just say it's the difference.
That'd be
That's grand.
15, as you were saying. Whereas obviously, if somebody gets shot with a phaser, that should be lights out most times.
In which case,
Unless
just
they're really hard.
just give it a high weapon rating.
So,
what I
yeah.
would suggest for like something like a Federation phaser, where they've got the stun and they've got like the insta disintegrate setting.
Yeah.
What I'd suggest is you give it variable weapon ratings. So you might say something like, oh, if you fire it on stun, it's got weapon rating. So then it's the difference plus 2 is your damage. Then if it's going to be on like kill mode, just give it some like ridiculously high weapons rating, like, oh, it's got plus 15 weapons. Because you've got to bear in mind that even if you shoot someone and they go down to 0, if they're a player, they're not necessarily dead, they're just out of action for a scene.
Yeah.
So you go, so in our example where like you're shooting at the Klingon, you've beat him by 3, you go, oh yeah, I'd set my phaser on kill. We go like, alright, that's 18 hit points worth of damage you've done. Alright, well he's only going to have like max 15 like stress, even if he's uninjured at the start of the fight. Right, that's him down if you've hit him. Now, if he's like an NPC, that's him dead. You've disintegrated him. You describe it however you want. If he's like a player character, oh, you shot him with it, but you can come up with whatever rationale you want, but it's not killed them. It's just taken him out of action. Maybe they get captured or whatever, and you can spin off from there. So that's how I'd do that.
And then obviously the 3 different types of characters that we've got: the red shirts, the B characters, the A characters.
Give them different levels of
different
stress.
levels of hit points, yeah.
Yeah, so
Cool.
I'd say, to be honest, do like how they did in D&D 4th edition with like minions for red shirts. Just give them 1 stress. Because then it's like, theoretically, like a Klingon could leap out, smack a red shirt, and he'd be dead.
Yeah.
Just give them one
Which
stress.
makes sense.
Yeah, just give them 1 stress. If they're like a low level NPC, you know, or whatever, like a sector, maybe give them between 5 and 10 stress. If they're like a full like A grade like character, give them the full 15.
Okay, so next thing to consider.
Yeah.
Again, it's Trek sci-fi. I've got at least 1 psychic in the player group.
Okay.
I've also got an AI who, again, I need to slightly adapt this so that people can like attack the computer system or try and hack into the computer system, which is her, so it is an attack on her. So obviously what we've been talking there has been all physical attacks and stuff.
Well, the thing is, because we're only using 1 stress track, mental attacks will just inflict stress on you in the same way, because it is quite abstracted. So in your... To be brutally honest, for your purposes, it doesn't matter whether you get taken out of action in the scene by a mental or psychic attack or whether it's a phaser. The end result is still you are taken out of action for that scene.
Okay. If I wanted to represent something, what I'm more thinking about is like character representation with the hit point. Obviously, it makes more sense for the big burly Klingon to have more physical hit points, less mental hit points.
Yeah.
Whereas the Betazoid, Betazoid in general for that matter, is going to have a lot more mental hit points than the Klingon, but his physical hit points are going to be sort of on the same scale as you would for a human. That particular character used to be a security officer, so he's going to be fairly tough on both.
Right, there's a couple of ways I can think just off the top of my head you can handle that. The first is you can split your stress track and have a physical and mental stress track, like Fate Core and Fate Condensed. And then if it's a physical attack, off the physical stress, mental attack comes off the mental. Easy peasy.
Yeah.
Now, if you're going to go that way, you might want to consider giving like maybe 10 instead of 15 on each, because then you've potentially got more stress, whereas...
What I was thinking was give them up to 10 on either and give them 15 points to spend themselves on what they think's appropriate.
That's a great way of doing it. The other way you could possibly... And that would work absolutely fine, I'm sure. The other way you could do it is, as I said, with like weapons and armour rating. So the way armour rating works is the reverse of weapon. So if you're phasering my Klingon and you beat me by 3 and I go... oh yeah, but I'm wearing like a Klingon combat armour, which gives me an armour rating of 3. It doesn't affect my defence roll, but then it deducts from the damage done. So if you've only done 3, I'm like, yeah, I've still taken the hit, but it's been like, the force of it's been deflected by my Klingon combat armour, so I've actually taken no damage.
So here's another thing.
Well, I was going to say, but before you go into your other thing, what you could do, if you didn't want to have 2 different stress tracks, what you could do is for people that are particularly strong sort of mentally, you could give them like an armour rating, but only against a certain type of attack. So you could say for like the Betazoid, you could say, yeah, it takes a physical attack, takes it normally. However, they have like armour rating 2 against mental attacks, so they'd be less likely to take damage off their single stress track from a mental source.
Okay, so this then brings you on to the different species in Star Trek. For example, Klingons are resilient to energy weapons. Ferengi are resilient to Betazoid mind reading.
Okay, right.
I think at the
sorry,
moment, their high concept always includes their species.
Yeah.
So it might be human, it might be Klingon, it might be... If that's sort of something that's in the show, I would probably just go, oh well, shortcut. Yeah, everybody knows.
I would stick with just that. Just have the high concept. Now, the way you can use that is obviously using the existing rules for aspects. Like to use the example of like you shot at my Klingon warrior again. When I'm making my defense roll, I'm making this defense roll. However, because I'm a battle hardened Klingon warrior, I'm going to spend a fate point with my high concept and get a +2 on that defense roll. Or I could be like, oh, okay, you're trying to attack me psychically. Well, but because I'm a Betazoid trained in telepathy, I'm going to spend a fate point and get a +2 to my defense roll. And I would just keep it as that, because that's nice and simple. It uses the rules you're already using. You don't need to add anything else.
Grand. Well, thank you for helping me sort that out.
That's all right.
Happy Federation Day, folks. Live long and prosper.
Indeed. New Star Trek's trash. And we'll see you all soon. We hope you've enjoyed that episode. If you want to get in touch with us, you can drop us an email. The address is rddrpgpodcast@gmail.com. Or if you want to leave us a voicemail message, you can head over to our page on speakpipe.com, and that will allow you to leave a 90-second voicemail, and you might even be featured in a future show. There's a link to this included in the show notes, as well as a link to our website and other places where you can contact us. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you soon.
My math sucks. Let me record that again.
I can't actually remember, because it's been a while, what the healing times are, so I'm going to actually look those up in the book.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. Well, because obviously we're going to edit this out, I'm going to drag on my name.
Chris, are you stealing my purple drink? I'll let you off.
Oh, I've got some Red Bull there you go.